When Lewis Hamilton opened a mysterious letter at his Monaco apartment, he had no idea his entire life was about to change forever. The world-famous race car driver had just won his 8th championship. He had money, fame, and everything a person could want, but something was missing, something he couldn't explain. The letter came from Meadowbrook, England, his childhood town, a place he hadn't thought about in 25 years. Inside was a message from Rosie Mitchell, his first friend, his first crush, his first kiss, the girl with beautiful red hair who gave him a compass necklace when they were 12 years old. Dear Lewis, I need to see you. It's about something that happened the summer we said goodbye. Lewis's hand shook as he read those words. What could Rosie possibly need to tell him after 25 years? Why now? Why reach out after all this time? He booked a flight to England that very night. When he arrived at their secret treehouse in Miller's Wood, Rosie was waiting. She looked different but the same, older but still beautiful, and she wasn't alone. Standing beside her was a young man, tall, with dark curly hair and eyes that looked strangely familiar, eyes that looked like Lewis's own eyes. "This is Oliver," Rosie said quietly, "my son." Lewis felt his heart stop. He shook the young man's hand, confused. Then he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Oliver was 24 years old, almost 25, which meant he was born exactly 9 months after that last summer, the summer Lewis left Meadowbrook, the summer he and Rosie said goodbye in the treehouse. The math was impossible to ignore. "Rosie," Lewis whispered, his voice shaking, "what are you trying to tell me?" Rosie's eyes filled with tears. "Lewis, there's something I should have told you 25 years ago, something that changed everything." But that wasn't all. Oliver looked sick, too thin, too tired. And the way Rosie held his hand told Lewis something was terribly wrong. What secret had Rosie kept for 25 years? Why was Oliver so sick? And what did she tell Lewis that left him completely frozen, unable to move or speak? Watch this entire video to discover the shocking truth that changed Lewis Hamilton's life forever. A truth about love, family, and a promise made in a treehouse 30 years ago. Truth that will make you believe in second chances and the power of coming home. Lewis Hamilton stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Monaco apartment, staring at the Mediterranean Sea sparkling below. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. In his hand, he held a glass of champagne that had long gone flat. Today should have been perfect. Today, he'd won his 8th Formula One World Championship, breaking records that people said could never be broken. But Lewis felt empty. His assistant, Marcus, had left an hour ago after the celebration dinner. The apartment was silent now, filled with trophies and photos from his incredible career. 25 years of racing, 25 years of pushing himself harder than anyone else. And for what? He had everything a person could want: money, fame, respect. But something was missing. Something had always been missing. "Mr. Hamilton," Marcus's voice came through the intercom, making Lewis jump. "I'm sorry to bother you, but a special courier just delivered a letter. He said it was urgent and had to be given to you personally." Lewis frowned. Urgent letters didn't come by courier anymore. Everything was email and text messages now. "Bring it up, please." 2 minutes later, Marcus handed him a cream-colored envelope. The paper felt expensive, heavy. Lewis turned it over and his heart stopped. The return address was written in neat handwriting: Meadowbrook, England, his childhood town, the place he hadn't thought about, hadn't let himself think about in years. "Will that be all, sir?" Marcus asked. Lewis nodded, unable to speak. His hands were shaking as he stared at the envelope. Marcus left quietly, and Lewis was alone with the letter that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. He sat down on his leather couch and took a deep breath. Then he opened it. The handwriting inside was instantly familiar, even though he hadn't seen it in 25 years. Neat, careful letters that slanted slightly to the right. His eyes went straight to the signature at the bottom: R.M. Rosie Mitchell. The room seemed to spin. Lewis gripped the letter tighter and forced himself to read from the beginning. "Dear Lewis, it's me, Rosie. I know this letter must be a shock after so many years. I've thought about writing to you 1,000 times, but I never had the courage. I'm not even sure this letter will reach you, but I have to try. I watched you win your 8th championship today. I was so proud of you, Lewis. You did everything you dreamed of doing. Do you remember? We used to sit in our treehouse and you'd tell me about becoming the greatest racing driver in the world. You made it happen. I need to see you. I know you're busy and important now, and I have no right to ask this of you after so long. But something happened the summer we said goodbye. something I never told you, something that changed everything. Please come home to Meadowbrook. The old treehouse still stands in Miller's Wood. I'll wait for you there every afternoon at 3 o'clock until you come. I understand if you can't. I understand if you don't want to. But I hope you remember the promise we made to each other under those oak tree branches. Please, Lewis, I need to tell you the truth. R.M. Lewis read the letter 3 times. His mind was flooded with memories he'd locked away for 25 years. Rosie Mitchell with her copper-red hair that caught fire in the sunlight. Her laugh that sounded like music. The way she held his hand when the other kids made fun of him for being different, for being poor, for dreaming too big. She'd been his best friend, his first crush, his first kiss. The summer before his family moved away, 12-year-old Lewis and Rosie had spent every day together. They'd promised to love each other forever. She'd given him a silver compass necklace on his last day in Meadowbrook. "So you'll always find your way back to me," she'd whispered. He reached under his shirt and pulled out the compass. He'd never taken it off. Not once in 25 years. Lewis stood up and walked to his bedroom. He opened his laptop and booked a private flight to England for 7 o'clock the next morning. He didn't think about his schedule or the interviews he was supposed to do. He didn't think about what his team would say. All he could think about was Rosie's words. "Something happened the summer we said goodbye, something I never told you." What could she possibly need to tell him after 25 years? What secret had she carried all this time? Lewis looked at the compass in his hand, then at the letter on his bed. Tomorrow he would finally go home. Tomorrow he would learn the truth. Whatever it was, his life was about to change forever. The private plane touched down at a small airfield outside London at 9 in the morning. Lewis had barely slept during the flight. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Rosie's face, not as she might look now, but as she'd been at 12 years old. Freckles across her nose. Green eyes that sparkled when she smiled. That wild red hair she was always trying to tame. A rental car was waiting for him. Lewis programmed Meadowbrook into the GPS and started driving. The closer he got to his childhood town, the faster his heart beat. England looked different than he remembered, but also exactly the same. The rolling green hills, the narrow roads lined with stone walls, the gray sky threatening rain. This was the England of his childhood, before Monaco apartments and championship trophies. As he drove through the countryside, memories flooded back whether he wanted them to or not. He was 7 years old, the new kid at Meadowbrook Primary School. His family had just moved to the small town and Lewis was scared. He was one of only 3 black children in the entire school. His clothes were hand-me-downs from cousins. His backpack had a broken zipper held together with safety pins. On his first day, 3 older boys cornered him at recess. "You don't belong here," one of them said, pushing Lewis against the brick wall. "Go back where you came from." Lewis had been too frightened to fight back, but then a voice cut through the playground noise. "Leave him alone." A girl with red hair and 2 braids marched up to the bullies. She was small, probably a year younger than them, but she stood with her hands on her hips like she was 10 feet tall. "He's new and you're being mean," she said firmly. "My mum says bullies are just scared people trying to feel big. Are you scared?" The boys had laughed at her, but they'd also backed away. Nobody wanted to be called scared. After they left, the girl turned to Lewis and smiled. "I'm Rosie Mitchell," she said, holding out her hand. "Want to be friends?" Lewis had taken her hand, and that was it. From that moment on, they were inseparable. Now driving through the English countryside 25 years later, Lewis smiled at the memory. Rosie had always been brave, braver than him in many ways. The GPS announced he was entering Meadowbrook, and Lewis's stomach tightened with nerves. The town appeared around a bend in the road, a cluster of stone buildings, a church steeple rising above the trees, shops lining the main street. It looked smaller than he remembered. Everything looked smaller. Lewis drove slowly down High Street, staring at the buildings. Mitchell's Bakery, where Rosie's mother had worked, was now called the Bread Box. The sign was different, but the building was the same. He could almost smell the cinnamon rolls Mrs. Mitchell used to give them for free when they stopped by after school. There was Meadowbrook Primary, the brick building where he and Rosie had met. The playground had new equipment, colorful plastic instead of rusty metal, but the oak tree in the corner was still there. Lewis remembered racing Rosie across that playground every single day. She usually won. He drove past the library where they'd spent rainy afternoons reading adventure books, past the corner store where they'd pooled their pocket money to buy sweets. past the fish and chip shop where Rosie's dad used to take them on Fridays, back before he left the family. Every street corner held a memory. Every building was a ghost of his past. Louis turned onto Miller's Lane, following the road that led to Miller's Wood. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. In a few minutes he would see Rosie. After 25 years he would finally see her again. What would she look like now? Would her hair still be that incredible shade of red? Would she still have those freckles? Would her eyes still light up when she smiled? And what was this secret she needed to tell him? What had happened that summer that she'd kept hidden for 25 years? Louis parked at the entrance to Miller's Wood and checked his watch. 2:30. He was half an hour early, but he couldn't wait any longer. He got out of the car and started walking down the familiar path. The woods looked exactly the same tall trees creating a canopy of green leaves overhead, the same narrow dirt path winding between the trunks, the same smell of earth and growing things. Louis had walked this path 1,000 times as a child, usually holding Rosie's hand. After 5 minutes, he reached the clearing, and there it was, the treehouse. Louis stopped walking and just stared. The treehouse was built in the biggest oak tree in the forest. He and Rosie had discovered it when they were 8 years old. Some older kids had built it years before and abandoned it. Louis and Rosie had claimed it as their secret hideout, spending hours up there talking about their dreams. The wooden boards looked weathered now, but the structure was still solid. Someone had been taking care of it. Fresh boards had been added to replace rotted ones. The rope ladder looked new. Louis walked closer, his heart pounding. He touched the trunk of the oak tree and found what he was looking for: 2 sets of initials carved into the bark, now stretched and faded with age. LH+RM. He'd carved those initials the summer before he left. He'd used his dad's pocket knife, working carefully to make the letters perfect. Rosie had watched, her hand on his shoulder. "Forever," she'd said when he finished. "Forever," Louis had agreed. But forever had only lasted until August, when his father announced they were moving away to pursue Louis's racing dreams. Louis's world had shattered that day. He was leaving everything behind: his school, his town, his best friend, his Rosie. Their last day together had been the hardest day of Louis's young life. They'd spent it here in the treehouse, making promises they both believed they'd keep. "I'll come back for you," 12-year-old Louis had sworn. "As soon as I'm old enough, as soon as I'm a famous driver, I'll come back and we'll get married, just like we planned." "Promise?" Rosie had asked, her green eyes serious and sad. "I promise," Louis had said. Then he'd leaned forward and kissed her, his first real kiss, awkward and sweet and perfect. The next day, his family had driven away from Meadowbrook. Louis had watched through the back window until the town disappeared. He'd cried for 3 hours straight. For years after that, Louis had thought about Rosie every single day. He tried to find her when he was 16 and had his first sponsor money. But Rosie Mitchell was a common name, and she wasn't on social media. Without knowing where she'd moved or what she was doing, finding her had been impossible. Eventually, the daily thoughts became weekly thoughts, then monthly, then just occasional aches in his heart when something reminded him of copper-red hair or the smell of cinnamon rolls. But he'd never stopped wearing the compass necklace, and he'd never stopped feeling like something essential was missing from his life. Now, standing under the oak tree where they'd carved their initials, Louis finally understood what that missing piece had been. It had been Rosie. It had always been Rosie. A sound behind him made Louis turn around. Someone was walking down the path through the trees. His breath caught in his throat. It was her. Rosie Mitchell stepped into the clearing, and Louis felt like he'd been struck by lightning. She was beautiful, not in the glossy, perfect way of the models and celebrities Louis had dated over the years. Beautiful in a real way that made his chest ache. Her copper-red hair fell in soft waves past her shoulders, catching the afternoon light filtering through the trees. She was taller than he remembered, of course. They'd both been children the last time they stood face to face. She wore simple jeans and a green sweater that matched her eyes, those eyes that he'd never forgotten. But there were differences too. Tiny lines around her eyes and mouth that spoke of years lived, of laughter and worry and time passing. Her face was thinner, more angular than the round-cheeked girl from his memories, and there was something in her expression, a sadness, a weight that hadn't been there when they were 12. "Louis," she said, and her voice broke slightly on his name. That voice. Louis had heard it in his dreams for 25 years, but hearing it in reality was completely different. It went straight to his heart. "Rosie," he managed to say, though his throat felt tight. "You came." She laughed, and even her laugh was the same, light and musical like wind chimes. I came. Louis, I've been coming here every afternoon for a week, hoping you'd get my letter. I was starting to think you wouldn't show up. Of course I came, Louis said, taking a step toward her. The movement felt both natural and terrifying. How could I not come? They stood there for a long moment, just looking at each other. 25 years of separation stretched between them like an invisible wall. Louis wanted to rush forward and hug her, to hold her like he'd held her that last day in the treehouse. But he didn't know if he had the right to touch her anymore. They weren't children now. They were strangers who had once been everything to each other. Rosie seemed to feel the same uncertainty. She twisted her hands together nervously. You look exactly the same, she said softly. I mean, obviously you're grown up now, but your eyes, they're exactly the same. So are yours, Louis replied. I'd have known you anywhere, Rosie. The sound of her name on his lips seemed to break something in her. Tears filled her eyes and she took a shaky breath. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry for everything, for not finding you sooner, for keeping secrets, for... Don't apologize, Louis interrupted gently. You have nothing to be sorry for. I'm the one who disappeared. I should have tried harder to find you. You were following your dreams, Rosie said, wiping her eyes quickly. You were becoming exactly what you were meant to be. I watched every race, you know, every single one. I was so proud of you, Louis. Louis felt something loosen in his chest. She'd been watching. She'd been thinking of him. He wasn't alone in carrying these memories all these years. I never forgot you, he said. Not for one day. Before Rosie could respond, Louis heard footsteps behind her on the path. Someone else was coming. Rosie glanced back and her expression changed, became more guarded, more nervous. A young man emerged from the trees and Louis felt his world tilt sideways. The man was tall and lean, probably in his mid-20s. He had dark, curly hair that fell across his forehead and skin a shade lighter than Louis's own. He moved with an athlete's grace, his hands shoved deep in the pockets of his jacket. But it was his face that made Louis's heart start to race. There was something familiar about him. Something in the shape of his jaw, the set of his shoulders, the way he held himself. Something that Louis couldn't quite identify, but that made his skin prickle with recognition. This is Oliver, Rosie said quietly, her voice shaking slightly. My son. Louis forced himself to smile and extended his hand. Nice to meet you, Oliver. Oliver's handshake was hesitant, uncertain. His grip was warm and his palm was slightly sweaty, as if he was nervous. Mr. Hamilton, he said, it's an honor to meet you. Please call me Louis, Louis said automatically, but his mind was racing. Rosie had a son. Of course she did. 25 years had passed. She'd lived an entire life without him. She might even be married, though he hadn't seen a wedding ring on her finger. But something felt wrong. Not wrong exactly, but significant. Important. Oliver was staring at him with an intensity that made Louis uncomfortable. The young man's eyes, dark brown, almost black, seemed to be searching Louis's face for something. Should we sit? Rosie gestured to the base of the oak tree, where a thick blanket had been spread out. I came prepared this time. They settled onto the blanket, Louis and Rosie sitting across from each other with Oliver slightly to the side. The afternoon sun was warm, but Louis felt cold. Something was happening here, something he didn't understand yet. I followed your career too, Oliver said suddenly. His voice was deeper than Louis expected, and there was an emotion in it that Louis couldn't name. Mum and I watched every race together. She'd record them if we couldn't watch live. You're a racing fan? Louis asked, trying to make normal conversation even though nothing about this situation felt normal. Not exactly, Oliver said with a small smile. I mean, I appreciate the sport, but I watched because... He glanced at his mother, who gave him an encouraging nod. I watched because Mum said you were important to her. She told me stories about you when I was growing up. Louis looked at Rosie in surprise. You did? Rosie's cheeks flushed pink. Of course I did. You were my best friend, Louis. You were, she trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken words. Louis became increasingly aware that Oliver was watching him with that same intense, searching gaze. It was starting to make him deeply uncomfortable. Oliver, Rosie said gently, why don't you give us a few minutes alone? Louis and I need to talk. Oliver's expression flickered with something, disappointment, fear, but he nodded. Sure, Mum, I'll just walk down to the creek. He stood up, but before leaving, he turned back to Lewis. "I'm really glad you came, Mr. Hamilton, really glad." There was such sincerity in his voice that Lewis felt a lump form in his throat. "I'm glad I came too," he said honestly. Oliver walked away through the trees and Lewis watched him go. Now that he thought about it, there was something about the way Oliver moved that reminded him of someone. Something about his height, his build, the way he... Lewis's thoughts stopped abruptly. No, it couldn't be. He turned back to Rosie, his heart suddenly pounding. She was watching him with eyes full of tears and fear and something else, something that looked like hope. "Rosie," Lewis said slowly, "how old is Oliver?" Rosie took a shaky breath. "He'll be 25 in 3 months. The math crashed over Lewis like a wave. 25 years ago, the summer before he left, the treehouse, the promises, the kiss that had been more than a kiss. "Rosie," Lewis whispered, "what are you trying to tell me?" She couldn't meet his eyes. She stared at her hands, twisted together in her lap. "I need to tell you about that summer, Lewis, about what happened after you left, about the secret I've been carrying for 25 years. Lewis's mind was spinning, putting pieces together that couldn't possibly fit but somehow did. Oliver's age, the familiar features Lewis couldn't quite place, the way the young man had stared at him with such intensity, the reason Rosie had finally reached out after all these years. "Please," Rosie whispered, finally looking up at him. "Please let me explain everything before you say anything. Let me tell you the whole story, and then you can decide what you want to do." Lewis opened his mouth, but no words came out. His entire body felt frozen. 25 years of his life were suddenly rearranging themselves into a completely different picture. "Start at the beginning," he finally managed to say. "Tell me everything." Rosie took a deep, shuddering breath and looked up at the treehouse above them. "Do you remember our last summer together? Really remember it?" Lewis nodded slowly. "Every single day of it. My dad told me in June that we were moving. We had until mid-August. I spent every moment I could with you." "We were inseparable that summer," Rosie said, her voice distant, as if she was watching those memories play out in front of her. "More than we'd ever been before. It was like we both knew our time was running out, and we were desperate to hold on to it." Lewis remembered. They'd been 12 years old, standing on the edge of becoming teenagers. Everything had felt more intense that summer, the colors brighter, the emotions stronger, the connection between them deeper. "Tell me what happened after I left," Lewis said quietly. "Start there." Rosie wiped her eyes and began to speak. "After you moved away, I was devastated. I cried for weeks. My mom was worried about me. I wouldn't eat, wouldn't talk to anyone, wouldn't leave my room except to go to school." "I was the same way," Lewis admitted. "My dad got angry with me. He said I needed to focus on racing, that friends would come and go, but my talent was forever." Rosie smiled sadly. "Your dad was wrong. Some friends don't come and go. Some friends leave marks on your soul that never fade." She paused, gathering courage. "I tried to reach you, Lewis. I wrote you letters, dozens of them. Every week for the first year, then once a month after that. I sent them to your old racing team, to your sponsors, anywhere I could find an address." Lewis felt his stomach drop. "I never got them, not one." "I know that now," Rosie said. "Your father must have kept them from you. He probably thought I was a distraction." She didn't sound angry, just resigned. "I kept writing anyway, even though you never wrote back. It helped me feel close to you." "What did you write about?" Lewis asked, his voice hoarse. "Everything. School, my day-to-day life, how much I missed you. And then..." She stopped, her hands trembling. 3 months after you left, I had to write about something different, something terrifying." Lewis's heart was beating so hard he could hear it in his ears. He knew what was coming, but he needed to hear her say it. "I was 13 years old," Rosie continued, "and I was pregnant." The word hung in the air between them. Even though Lewis had suspected it, hearing it confirmed was like being punched in the chest. "But we were 12, he whispered. "We were just children. We couldn't have." "That last day in the treehouse," Rosie said softly. "Do you remember? We made promises about the future. We said we'd get married someday. And we kissed, but it became more than kissing. We were children who didn't understand what we were doing. We were innocent and curious and so in love, or what we thought was love at 12 years old." Lewis closed his eyes, remembering. That sunset in the treehouse, the way Rosie had looked at him, the promises they'd made, the kissing that had turned into fumbling, awkward exploration. They hadn't understood what they were doing. They'd been children playing at being grown-ups with no idea of the consequences. I didn't understand what was happening at first, Rosie continued. I was 13 and knew nothing about my body. When I finally told my mom, she was furious. She demanded to know who the father was. I told her it was you, but you were gone, unreachable. What did she do? Louis asked, dreading the answer. She wanted me to. Rosie couldn't finish the sentence, but I refused. I was 13 years old and stubborn and terrified, but I knew I couldn't do that. This was our baby, Louis, part of you and part of me. I couldn't let go of the last piece of you I had. Tears were streaming down Louis's face now. He couldn't stop them. You were just a child yourself. I know, Rosie said. Everyone told me I was ruining my life. My mom, the school counselors, even the doctor. But I didn't care, I thought. She laughed bitterly. I thought it was romantic. I thought I was being loyal to you. I didn't understand what I was choosing. What happened? Louis asked. How did you manage? My mom sent me to live with her sister in Scotland. The story was that I was studying abroad for a year. I had the baby there in May, Oliver. Then I came back to Meadowbrook that summer with a cover story about adopting my cousin's child. Louis tried to imagine 13-year-old Rosie, alone and pregnant and terrified, and his heart shattered. You went through all of that by yourself. I had my aunt, Rosie said. She was kind. She helped me through the birth and taught me how to care for Oliver. But yes, essentially I was alone. I was 14 years old with a baby, trying to finish school, trying to survive. Why didn't you tell me? The question burst out of Louis before he could stop it. Why didn't you find a way to reach me? Rosie looked at him with such sadness that Louis almost couldn't bear it. You were 13 years old, Louis, living your dream, racing go-karts and winning championships. Your father had sacrificed everything for your career. How could I destroy that? How could I burden a child with a child? I had a right to know, Louis said, but his voice lacked conviction. Deep down, he understood. What could a 13-year-old boy have done? His father would have been devastated. His racing career would have ended before it began. His entire life would have been derailed. I made a choice, Rosie said firmly. Right or wrong, I chose to protect you. I chose to let you live your dreams while I dealt with the consequences of what we did together. Maybe it was the wrong choice. Maybe I should have told you. But I was 14 years old and trying to do the right thing. They sat in silence for a long moment. A bird sang somewhere in the trees. The wind rustled the leaves above them. The world kept turning, indifferent to the revelation that was rewriting Louis's entire life. Tell me about him, Louis finally said. Tell me about Oliver. Rosie's face transformed when she talked about her son. He was the most beautiful baby I'd ever seen. He had your eyes from the very beginning, those same brown eyes. As he grew, he looked more and more like you. The same smile, the same way of holding his head when he's thinking. Did he have a good childhood? Louis needed to know. Was he happy? I did my best, Rosie said. We were poor, I won't lie about that. I worked 3 jobs while finishing school through night classes. My mom helped, though she never forgave me for keeping the baby. But Oliver never went hungry. He always had clothes and books and love, so much love. Did you tell him about me? Yes, Rosie said. I showed him pictures from when we were young. I told him stories about the kind, brave boy who had been my best friend. I never spoke badly about you, Louis. I never let him think you abandoned us. I made sure he knew you didn't know about him. Louis felt like his chest was being crushed. He grew up without a father because of choices I never got to make. He grew up with a mother who loved him more than life itself, Rosie corrected gently. And he turned out wonderful. He's kind and talented and brave. He's studying art at university. He paints beautiful things. He's everything good that came from that summer we shared. Louis looked toward the path where Oliver had disappeared. His son. He had a son. A 24-year-old son who had lived his entire life without knowing his father. Why now? Louis asked suddenly. Why reach out to me now after 25 years? What changed? Rosie's expression shifted and Louis saw fear flicker across her face. Real deep fear. Because, she said quietly, Oliver is sick, and we need your help. The words hit Louis like a physical blow. Sick? What do you mean sick? Before Rosie could answer, they heard footsteps. Oliver was returning from the creek, his hands in his pockets, his expression carefully neutral. As he walked closer, Louis studied him with new eyes, desperate, hungry eyes that were seeing his son for the first time. Oliver was tall, maybe 6 feet. He had Louis's build, lean and athletic. His dark, curly hair fell across his forehead in a way that reminded Louis of his own hair at that age. And those eyes, how had Louis not seen it immediately? They were his mother's eyes, the same shade of brown, the same shape. Sorry, Oliver said as he reached them. I didn't mean to interrupt. I just thought, maybe it's time I was part of this conversation. Rosie looked at Louis, asking permission without words. Louis nodded, unable to speak. Oliver sat down on the blanket, cross-legged, and looked directly at Louis. She told you, didn't she, that you're my father? Yes, Louis managed to say. And you believe it? Oliver asked. There was vulnerability in his voice, a need for acceptance that made Louis's heart ache. Yes, Louis said more firmly. I can see it now. In your face, your eyes, you have my mother's hands. He pointed to Oliver's long fingers. Exactly the same. Oliver looked down at his hands with wonder, as if seeing them for the first time. Really? Really? Louis confirmed. Then he took a deep breath. Your mother said you're sick. Tell me what's wrong. Oliver and Rosie exchanged glances. Finally, Oliver spoke. I have acute myeloid leukemia. I was diagnosed 8 months ago. The medical term meant nothing to Louis at first. Then understanding crashed over him. Cancer. His son had cancer. No, Louis whispered. No, that can't be right. You look healthy. You look fine. I'm good at hiding it, Oliver said with a sad smile. I've had a lot of practice, but the truth is I'm not fine. The doctors have tried chemotherapy and radiation. Nothing has worked well enough. The cancer keeps coming back stronger. Louis felt like the ground was disappearing beneath him. He just discovered he had a son, and now he was being told that son might die. There has to be something, Louis said desperately. Better doctors, experimental treatments, anything. Money isn't a problem. I'll pay for whatever. It's not about money, Rosie interrupted gently. We've already seen the best doctors in England. They all say the same thing. Oliver needs a bone marrow transplant from a close genetic match. Understanding began to dawn. And you need me to be tested. Yes, Oliver said simply. Mum was tested. She's not compatible. Neither is my grandmother. We searched the bone marrow registry for months without finding a match. According to the doctors, a parent or sibling has the best chance of being compatible. I don't have siblings, Louis said, processing this information. So you need me. We need you, Rosie confirmed, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry, Louis. I swore I'd never burden you with this. I swore I'd handle everything on my own, just like I always have. But Oliver is dying, and I'll do anything to save him, even if it means you hate me forever for keeping this secret. Louis looked between Rosie and Oliver, these two people who were suddenly the most important people in his world. His first love, his son, both of them staring at him with fear and hope mixed together. I need to understand something first, Louis said slowly. That last day we spent together, in the treehouse, walk me through exactly what happened. Rosie closed her eyes, remembering. It was August 15th. You were leaving in 2 days. We'd spent the whole day together, our goodbye day, though neither of us wanted to say those words. Louis picked up the story, the memories flooding back. We packed sandwiches and climbed up into the treehouse. We talked about the future, about what would happen when I became a famous driver. You promised you'd come back for me, Rosie said softly. You said as soon as you were old enough, you'd return to Meadowbrook and we'd get married, just like we'd always planned. I meant it, Louis said, every word. Oliver was listening intently, hearing the story of his own conception for the first time. We watched the sunset through the leaves, Louis continued. We held hands and made promises, and then we kissed, Rosie finished. But it wasn't like the quick kisses we'd shared before. It was different. We were 12 years old and didn't understand what we were feeling. We just knew we loved each other and we were about to be separated forever. Louis remembered the innocence of that moment, the sweetness. They'd been children playing at being grown-ups with no concept of consequences or reality. Just two kids who loved each other, trying to hold on to something that was slipping away. "We didn't know what we were doing," Louis said, his voice thick with emotion. "We were so young, so innocent." "But biology doesn't care about innocence," Rosie said. "3 months later, I was pregnant. 13 years old and pregnant, and the father was gone." Oliver had tears running down his face now. "I never blamed you," he said to Louis. "Mum made sure I understood. You didn't know. You were a child too. She showed me pictures of you from back then. You were just a kid with dreams and a kind smile." Louis looked at this young man, this person who existed because of one innocent summer afternoon, and felt overwhelmed by emotions he couldn't name. Grief for the years lost, fear for Oliver's illness, wonder that something so beautiful had come from that day, anger at a universe that would bring them together only to threaten to tear them apart. "I have videos," Oliver said suddenly, pulling out his phone. "Mum recorded every one of your races. Even before I knew you were my father, I watched them." She'd point you out and say, "That's Louis. He was my best friend. He was the bravest, kindest person I ever knew." He scrolled through his phone and held it out. Louis saw himself on the screen, younger, celebrating a victory. In the background, he could hear Rosie's voice. "Look at him go, Oliver. He did it. I always knew he would." Louis's vision blurred with tears. While he'd been racing around the world, achieving his dreams, Rosie had been here, raising their son alone, working multiple jobs, watching his victories from a distance and being proud of him despite everything. "Why didn't you resent me?" Louis asked Rosie. "How could you not hate me for leaving you to deal with all of this alone?" "Because you didn't leave me," Rosie said firmly. "You left Meadowbrook to follow your dreams. You didn't know about Oliver. You didn't choose to abandon us. And even if you had known..." She paused. "Louis, we were 12 years old, children. What happened between us shouldn't have resulted in a baby. It was biology, not choice. I could never hate you for that." Louis stood up abruptly and walked to the oak tree. He pressed his palms against the rough bark, trying to ground himself. His whole life had just been rewritten. Every choice he'd made, every victory he'd celebrated, every relationship he'd had, all of it happened while his son was growing up without him. "I missed everything," he said to the tree. His first steps, his first words, his first day of school. Birthdays, Christmas mornings, scraped knees, and bedtime stories. I missed his entire life. "I took videos," Rosie said from behind him, "and photos, thousands of them. I saved everything, his artwork, his school reports, his baby teeth. I did it thinking that maybe someday I'd find you and you could see who he'd become." Louis turned around. Rosie and Oliver were standing now, watching him with identical expressions of nervous hope. "I want to see everything," Louis said. "Every photo, every video, every report card. I want to know everything I missed. But first..." He walked back to them and looked directly at Oliver. "First, we're going to save your life. Tomorrow morning, we're finding the best hospital in England and I'm getting tested. Do you understand me?" Oliver nodded, tears streaming down his face. "You'll really do it, even after everything?" "You're my son," Louis said simply. The words felt strange and wonderful in his mouth. "Of course I'll do it." But Rosie stepped forward, her expression serious. "Louis, before you agree to this, there's something else you need to know. Something important." Louis looked at her, unable to imagine what else there could possibly be. "What is it?" Rosie took a deep breath, and Louis saw something in her eyes that looked like fear mixed with determination. "Before you commit to being part of Oliver's life, before you get tested, before you make any promises, I need to tell you the real reason I finally reached out to you after all these years." Louis felt his stomach clench with anxiety. "What do you mean? You just told me Oliver needs a bone marrow transplant. That's why you contacted me." "That's part of it," Rosie said, her voice trembling. "But it's not the whole truth." Oliver reached out and took his mother's hand. "Mum, you don't have to." "Yes, I do," Rosie interrupted firmly. She turned back to Louis, and he saw tears gathering in her eyes. "I need you to understand everything before you decide to be part of our lives. I won't trick you into this, Louis. I won't let you feel trapped or obligated." "Just tell me," Louis said, his heart racing. "Whatever it is, just say it." Rosie pulled a thick folder from her bag that had been lying beside the blanket. The folder was worn at the edges, stuffed so full that papers peeked out from the sides. She held it against her chest like a shield. "These are letters," she said quietly. "Letters I wrote to you over the years, dozens and dozens of them. And these," she pulled out a second, smaller folder, "are letters Oliver wrote. He didn't know I was saving them. I never sent any of them because I couldn't find you, and then later because I was afraid." She held both folders out to Louis. He took them with shaking hands. "Before you agree to help us," Rosie continued, "I need you to read these. I need you to understand what our lives were like. The struggles, the joys, the moments you missed. I need you to see the whole picture before you commit to anything." Louis opened the first folder. Rosie's teenage handwriting stared up at him, the ink slightly faded with age. "Dear Louis, you've been gone for 3 months now, and I have to tell you something. I'm pregnant. I'm 13 years old and I'm going to have a baby. Our baby. I'm so scared, Louis. I wish you were here. I wish I could hold your hand like you used to hold mine when I was frightened. Mom is furious. She wants me to get rid of it, but I can't. This baby is part of you and you're the best person I've ever known. How could I let go of that? I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how I'll manage. But I wanted you to know, even if you never read this letter, somewhere in the world there's a piece of you and me growing. I still love you. I'll always love you. Rosie." Louis's hands trembled as he read. He flipped to the next letter, dated 6 months later. "Dear Louis, I'm living with my aunt in Scotland now. Nobody in Meadowbrook knows I'm pregnant except Mum. The story is I'm studying abroad. I'm showing now. My belly is getting round. Sometimes I feel the baby move and it's the strangest, most wonderful feeling. I talk to the baby about you. I tell them about the boy who stood up to bullies for me, who raced me across playgrounds, who promised we'd get married someday. I play videos of your races on my aunt's computer. You're doing so well, Louis. You're winning everything. I'm so proud of you. I hope the baby has your eyes. Rosie." Louis couldn't breathe. He flipped through more letters, each one a window into a life he'd never known existed. 14-year-old Rosie describing Oliver's birth. 16-year-old Rosie celebrating Oliver's second birthday with a homemade cake. 19-year-old Rosie working 3 jobs while Oliver started school. Then he opened Oliver's folder. The first letter was written in a child's careful handwriting. Each letter formed slowly and deliberately. "Dear Dad, I'm 6 today. Mum made me a cake with race cars on it. She says you're a race car driver and that's why I like cars so much. She says you're busy following your dreams. I hope your dreams are good. I got a new coloring book. I colored a picture for you. Mum is keeping it safe. Love, Oliver." Louis felt something break inside his chest. He flipped through more letters, watching Oliver grow up through his words. 7-year-old Oliver learning to ride a bike. 10-year-old Oliver trying go-karting for the first time. 13-year-old Oliver asking why his dad had never visited. "Dear Dad, I'm 13 now, the same age you were when I was born. Mum explained everything to me last year, how young you both were, how she made the choice not to tell you. I understand now. You were just a kid too. Sometimes I see you on TV and I try to imagine what it would be like to meet you. Would you like me? Would you be disappointed? Would you wish I didn't exist? I'm not angry that you're not here. Mum did a good job raising me alone, but I do wonder what it would be like to have a dad. Your son maybe, Oliver." Tears were streaming down Louis's face. He looked up at Oliver, who was watching him with an expression of painful vulnerability. "You wrote these not knowing if I'd ever read them?" Louis asked. "I wrote them because it made me feel closer to you," Oliver said softly. "Mum told me so many stories about you that I felt like I knew you, even though we'd never met. Writing to you helped me feel less alone." Louis flipped to the last letter in Oliver's folder. The handwriting was mature now, the words of a young adult. "Dear Dad, I'm 24, I'm sick. Mum finally told me she's going to try to find you. I'm scared you'll hate us for this, for only reaching out when we need something. I'm scared you'll feel trapped, obligated to help a stranger who happens to share your DNA. But mostly I'm scared I'll die without ever knowing you. I've watched every interview you've ever done. I know you love dogs and Italian food. I know you're passionate about equality and kindness. I know you're afraid of letting people down. You're my hero and you don't even know I exist. If you're reading this, it means Mum found the courage to reach out. Please don't judge her too harshly. She spent 25 years trying to do right by both of us. Your son, if you'll have me, Oliver. Louis closed the folder and pressed it against his chest. When he looked up, both Rosie and Oliver were crying. I need to tell you the truth, Rosie said through her tears. Yes, Oliver needs a bone marrow transplant. Yes, we need your help medically, but that's not the only reason I wrote to you. She took a shaky breath. 6 months ago, when Oliver was first diagnosed, I realized something. I'd spent 25 years lying to myself, telling myself I was protecting you by keeping Oliver's secret, telling myself it was noble that I was letting you live your dreams. But the truth is, I was a coward. Mum, no, Oliver started, but Rosie shook her head. I was terrified of rejection, she continued. Terrified that you'd moved on completely, that you'd forgotten me, that you'd see Oliver as a burden or a mistake. So I hid. I kept our son from you for 25 years because I was afraid. She looked directly at Louis, her green eyes blazing with emotion. When Oliver got sick, I had to face my cowardice. What if he died and you never knew he existed? What if I'd stolen your chance to know your own child? That wasn't protection, that was theft. So you're saying you reached out because of guilt? Louis asked slowly. No, Rosie said firmly. I reached out because I finally found courage. Courage to risk rejection. Courage to tell you the truth. Courage to give you the choice I should have given you 25 years ago. She stepped closer to him. Before you agree to help Oliver, I need you to understand what you're agreeing to. This isn't just a medical procedure. If you get tested, if you're a match, if you donate bone marrow, you're not just saving his life. You're stepping into it. You'll be his father, not just his donor. I understand that, Louis said. Do you? Rosie challenged. Because Oliver isn't just sick, he's dying. The doctors give him maybe 6 months without a transplant. Even with one, there's no guarantee. You could get tested, get your hopes up, bond with a son you just discovered, and then lose him anyway. Louis felt the weight of her words. She was right, this wasn't simple. This was stepping into a tragedy that was already in motion. I won't blame you if you walk away, Rosie continued. I won't be angry if this is too much. You have your own life, your career, probably someone you love. You don't owe us anything. We were children when this happened, and you never chose this. Stop, Louis said firmly. He set the folders down carefully and stood up. Stop giving me permission to abandon you. He walked to Oliver and knelt in front of him. You are my son. I didn't know you existed until an hour ago, but you're my son. And I don't need folders full of letters to tell me that. I can see it in your face, in your eyes, in the way you move. You're part of me. Oliver's tears fell faster. Really? Really? Louis confirmed. He turned to Rosie. And you did what you thought was right. Were you scared? Yes. Did you make choices I might have made differently? Maybe. But you were 14 years old and alone, and you raised this incredible young man by yourself. Don't apologize to me for that. Don't ask my forgiveness for being brave enough to survive. Rosie covered her face with her hands, sobbing. Louis stood and pulled her into his arms. She resisted for a moment, then collapsed against him, crying into his shoulder like she'd been holding these tears for 25 years. I'm so sorry, she whispered against his chest. I'm so sorry for all of it. I know, Louis said, holding her tight. I know. Oliver stood and wrapped his arms around both of them, and for a moment they stayed like that, 3 people bound by biology and choices and love, holding each other under the oak tree where it all began. When they finally pulled apart, Louis wiped his eyes and tried to smile. Okay, tomorrow we find a hospital and get me tested. But tonight I want to hear everything. Every story, every moment I missed. Can we do that? Yes, Rosie said, smiling through her tears. We can do that. There's just one thing I still don't understand, Louis said, looking between them. In your letter, you said you needed to tell me something that would leave me frozen. Surely you didn't mean just about Oliver's illness. Rosie and Oliver exchanged a long look, and Louis saw something pass between them, something heavy with meaning. No, Rosie said quietly. There's more. One more truth I need to tell you before we move forward. Louis felt his heart begin to race again. How could there possibly be more? He just discovered he had a son who was dying. What else could there be? Let's sit down, Rosie said softly, gesturing back to the blanket. Her hands were shaking. They settled back onto the ground, Lewis and Rosie facing each other with Oliver between them. The afternoon sun was beginning to sink lower, casting long shadows through the trees. Birds called to each other in the branches above, completely unaware of the life-changing conversation happening below. Rosie twisted her hands in her lap, unable to meet Lewis's eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again. Lewis had never seen her look so vulnerable, so frightened. "Mum," Oliver said gently, placing his hand over hers. "It's okay, just tell him." Rosie nodded and took a deep, shuddering breath. When she finally looked up at Lewis, her green eyes were swimming with tears and something else, something that looked like hope mixed with terror. "Lewis," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "do you remember what I said in my letter? That something happened the summer we said goodbye, something that changed everything." "Yes," Lewis said. "Oliver, you were talking about Oliver." "I was," Rosie confirmed. "But there was something else too. Something I realized while I was pregnant, something I understood while I was raising our son alone, something I've known for 25 years but never had the chance to say to you." She paused, gathering courage. Lewis waited, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. "I need you to understand," Rosie continued, "that when I wrote that letter asking you to come back, I told myself it was just for Oliver, just for the medical match, just to save his life. That was the logical reason, the practical reason." "But," Lewis prompted when she fell silent again. "But that was a lie," Rosie said, her voice cracking. "I lied to myself and I almost lied to you too." She looked directly at him now, and Lewis saw raw emotion in her expression, years and years of buried feelings rising to the surface. "The truth is," Rosie said, "I didn't just reach out to you because Oliver is sick. I reached out because I've been in love with you for 25 years and I couldn't die, or watch Oliver die, without telling you." The words hung in the air between them. Lewis felt like time had stopped. The forest went silent. Even the birds seemed to pause their singing. "What?" he whispered. Tears were streaming down Rosie's face now, but she didn't look away. "I never stopped loving you, Lewis. Not for one single day in 25 years. Every man I dated, I compared to the 12-year-old boy who held my hand in a treehouse. Every time I looked at Oliver, I saw you and fell in love with you all over again." "Rosie," Lewis started, but she held up her hand. "Please let me finish. I need to say all of this." She wiped her eyes quickly and continued. "I convinced myself it was just nostalgia, just the memory of first love, just the connection of sharing a child, but it's not. It's never been just that." She pulled something from her pocket, a worn silver bracelet that matched Lewis's compass necklace. He'd never known she had one too. "I wear this every day," Rosie said, holding it up. "Just like you wear your compass. I saw it under your shirt when you arrived. We've both been carrying pieces of that summer with us all this time." Lewis reached under his collar and pulled out the compass necklace, holding it in his palm. The silver was worn smooth from 25 years of being worn against his skin. "I've never taken it off," he admitted. "Not once." "I know," Rosie said softly. "I could see it in interviews and photos. Even when you were standing on podiums celebrating victories, you were wearing the compass I gave you. Do you know what that did to me? Watching you achieve everything you dreamed of while wearing a reminder of me." "What did it do?" Lewis asked, his voice hoarse. "It gave me hope," Rosie said. "Foolish, impossible hope that maybe you hadn't forgotten me completely, that maybe, somewhere in your heart, you still remembered the girl who loved you." Oliver was crying silently, watching his parents with an expression of wonder and sadness mixed together. "When I wrote that letter," Rosie continued, "I told myself I was doing it for Oliver, and I'd do anything to save my son's life. But I was also doing it for me. For the girl who gave you a compass and never stopped hoping you'd find your way back. For the woman who raised your son with stories of your kindness. For the person who watched every single one of your races and felt proud and heartbroken at the same time." She was fully crying now, the words tumbling out like they'd been held back for too long. "I don't expect anything from you. You have your life, your career, probably someone you love. I just needed you to know that I love you. I loved you when we were 12. I loved you when I was 14 and alone with our baby. I loved you when I was 20 and struggling to survive. I love you now at 37, sitting in front of you and risking everything by telling you the truth." Louis sat frozen exactly as the title of their story promised. His mind was reeling, his heart was pounding, and every emotion he'd ever felt seemed to be crashing over him at once. "I wanted you to come home because I missed you," Rosie whispered. "Because I love you. Because I never stopped. That's the truth I needed to tell you. That's what I hoped would bring you back, not just obligation, not just medical necessity, but love. Real, deep, impossible love that survived 25 years of separation." The silence that followed was absolute. Louis couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't think. 25 years of his life were suddenly making sense in a way they never had before. Every relationship that had never quite worked, every victory that felt incomplete, every moment when he'd felt like something essential was missing. It had all been leading back to this clearing, to this woman, to this truth. "Say something," Rosie whispered, her voice breaking. "Please say something, Louis. Even if it's to tell me I'm crazy. Even if it's to say you don't feel the same. Just say something." Louis looked at her, really looked at her. Not as a memory, not as the ghost of his childhood, but as the real woman sitting in front of him. A woman who had faced impossible choices with courage, who had raised his son alone with love and strength, who had carried a secret for 25 years to protect his dreams, who was brave enough to risk rejection by telling him the truth. And suddenly, Louis understood something he'd been blind to his entire adult life. "Rosie," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "do you know why I've never married?" She shook her head, confusion flickering across her tear-stained face. "Because every woman I dated I compared to you," Louis said. "To the girl with red hair who stood up to bullies for me, who held my hand when I was scared, who kissed me goodbye in a treehouse and gave me a compass so I'd find my way home." Rosie's eyes widened. "I told myself I was too focused on racing," Louis continued. "Too busy, too dedicated to my career to settle down. But that wasn't true. The truth is, I've been looking for you in every person I met. And nobody ever measured up to the memory of a 12-year-old girl who loved me." "Louis," Rosie breathed. "I've been driving in circles for 25 years, Louis said, the realization hitting him like a wave. "Racing around and around the same tracks, always feeling like something was missing, never understanding what it was. But I know now. I was missing you. I was missing home." He reached out and took her hand. The touch sent electricity through him, the same electricity he'd felt at 12 years old, and every moment since when he'd allowed himself to remember her. "I never stopped loving you either," Louis said, and the words felt like they'd been trapped inside him for 25 years, finally breaking free. "I convinced myself it was just nostalgia, just childhood memories. But it wasn't. Every championship I won, I wished you were there. Every podium I stood on, I looked for you in the crowd. You've been the missing piece of every victory." Oliver made a sound, half laugh, half sob. "Are you too serious right now?" Louis and Rosie looked at him, then back at each other, and suddenly they were both laughing and crying at the same time. "We're idiots," Rosie said through her tears. "We've wasted 25 years." "Then let's not waste another minute," Louis said. He leaned forward and kissed her. It was their second kiss 25 years after their first. And just like that first kiss in the treehouse, it was awkward and sweet and absolutely perfect. But this time they weren't children. This time they understood what they were feeling. This time they knew what they were choosing. When they pulled apart, Oliver was grinning through his tears. "Finally," he said. "Do you know how long I've waited for this?" "How long?" Louis asked, unable to stop smiling. "My entire life," Oliver said. "Mum never dated seriously. She said her heart wasn't available. I always hoped it was because she was still in love with you." "It was," Rosie admitted, blushing. "It always was." Louis pulled her close, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. With his other arm, he reached for Oliver, pulling his son into the embrace. The three of them sat there under the oak tree, holding each other as the sun continued to sink lower in the sky. "So what happens now?" Oliver asked after a while. "Do you two just pick up where you left off?" "I don't know," Louis admitted honestly. "We have a lot to figure out, a lot of time to make up for." "But we'll figure it out together," Rosie said firmly. "All three of us." "Together," Louis agreed. He looked at Oliver. "First, we save your life. Tomorrow, we find the best hospital in England and get me tested. Everything else can wait." "Everything else?" Rosie asked with a small smile. Louis kissed her forehead. "Well, maybe not everything, But the complicated stuff, where we live, how we make this work with my career, what we tell people, all of that can wait. Right now, the only thing that matters is that we're together. After 25 years, Rosie said wonderingly. After 25 years, Louis echoed. Oliver pulled out his phone and looked at the time. It's getting late. Mum, we should probably head home, unless, he looked at Louis hopefully. Do you want to come over for dinner, see where we live? Louis didn't hesitate. Yes, absolutely yes. As they packed up the blanket and started walking back through the trees toward the parking area, Oliver suddenly stopped. Wait, he said, turning to Louis with a serious expression. There's one more thing, something I need to tell you both before we go any further. Louis and Rosie exchanged worried glances. What else could there possibly be? Oliver's serious expression lasted only a moment before his face broke into a huge grin. I'm sorry I lied. There's nothing else to tell. I just wanted to see if you'd both panic again. Louis stared at him in disbelief, then started laughing. You're terrible. I learned from the best, Oliver said, glancing at his mother with a mischievous smile. Rosie swatted his arm playfully. I never taught you to scare people like that. No, but you did teach me to have a sense of humor even when things are hard, Oliver said, his expression softening. You taught me that laughter helps when you're scared. The playfulness faded from Rosie's face, replaced by understanding. You're scared. Terrified, Oliver admitted quietly. But having you both here together makes it a little less frightening. Louis realized something in that moment. His son, this young man he'd only known for a few hours, had already figured out how to face his mortality with grace and humor. That took incredible strength. Actually, Oliver continued, his voice becoming more serious now, I do want to say something real. I've spent my whole life wondering what I'd say if I ever met you. I practiced speeches in my head, wrote them in letters you never read. And now that you're here, all I can think is, thank you. Thank you, Louis repeated, confused. For what? For not running away, Oliver said simply. When Mum told you about me, you could have left. When you learned I was sick, you could have said it was too much. When Mum told you she loved you, you could have rejected her. But you didn't, you stayed. You chose us. Louis felt his throat tighten with emotion. Oliver, I didn't choose you in spite of the circumstances. I chose you because you're my son. Because the moment I looked into your eyes, I saw myself. Because you exist, and that's reason enough. But you didn't have to, Oliver insisted. You didn't ask for any of this. A son you never knew about, a medical crisis, a complicated relationship with my mum. You could walk away and nobody would blame you. I would blame me, Louis said firmly. He walked to Oliver and placed both hands on his son's shoulders. Listen to me. I've spent 25 years achieving everything I ever dreamed of. Championships, records, fame, money. But you know what? All of it felt empty because something was missing. I didn't know what it was until today. What was it? Oliver asked. You, Louis said. And your mother. You two are what I've been searching for in every victory, every relationship, every moment of my life. I wasn't complete because half of my heart was here in Meadowbrook, and I didn't even know it. Oliver's eyes filled with tears. Really? Really? Louis confirmed. He pulled his son into a tight embrace. You're not a burden or an obligation. You're a gift. The best gift I've ever received, even if it came 25 years late. They held each other for a long moment. Over Oliver's shoulder, Louis saw Rosie crying again, but these were happy tears now. When they pulled apart, Oliver wiped his eyes and laughed. Okay, enough emotional stuff for one day. I'm starving and I promised you'd see where we live. Fair warning though, it's not fancy like your Monaco apartment probably is. I don't care about fancy, Louis said honestly. I just want to be where you two are. They walked back through Miller's Wood together, Louis in the middle with his arms around both Rosie and Oliver's shoulders. The path that had felt so lonely when Louis walked it alone now felt perfect with his family beside him. When they reached the parking area, Oliver pointed to an old blue sedan. That's our car. You can follow us in yours. Louis looked at his expensive rental car, then at their modest vehicle and felt a wave of emotion. While he'd been buying luxury cars and living in penthouses, Rosie had been driving this old sedan and raising their son. The contrast felt wrong somehow. Actually, Louis said, why don't we all go together in my car? We can pick yours up later." "You don't have to do that," Rosie said quickly. "I want to," Louis insisted. "Please, I've missed 25 years of car rides with you too. Let me make up for at least one." They piled into Louis's rental car, Oliver claiming the back seat while Rosie sat in front. As Louis started the engine, Oliver leaned forward between the seats. "So, Dad," Oliver said, testing out the word, "do all famous race car drivers drive this carefully, or is it just you?" Louis glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Oliver grinning. "Are you saying I drive too slowly?" "I'm saying my mum drives faster than this," Oliver teased. "That's because your mother is terrifying behind the wheel," Louis shot back, surprising himself with how naturally the banter came. "Hey," Rosie protested, but she was laughing. As they drove through Meadowbrook streets, Oliver pointed out landmarks from his childhood. "That's the primary school I went to, the same one you and Mum went to. And there's the library where Mum worked part-time when I was little. Oh, and that chip shop. They still make the best fish and chips in England." Louis drank in every detail, wanting to memorize everything about the town where his son had grown up. They passed the bakery again, and Rosie's expression turned sad. "My mum sold the bakery 5 years ago," she said quietly. "She couldn't manage it anymore after her heart attack." "Is she?" Louis couldn't finish the question. "She's alive," Rosie assured him, "but she's never really forgiven me for keeping Oliver. She loves him now, of course, but our relationship is complicated." "Does she know you contacted me?" Louis asked. "Yes," Rosie said. "She wasn't happy about it. She thinks I'm setting myself up for heartbreak." "She doesn't know you very well then," Louis said softly, "because I'm not going anywhere." Rosie directed him to turn onto a narrow street lined with small cottages. She pointed to one near the end, a tiny stone house with a red door and a garden full of flowers. "That's home," she said simply. Louis parked in front of the cottage and just stared. This was where his son had grown up, where Rosie had raised him alone, where 25 years of life he'd missed had happened. The cottage was small but well-maintained. The garden was beautiful, full of roses and lavender and other flowers Louis couldn't name. Window boxes overflowed with bright blooms. A small wooden bench sat by the front door. "It's perfect," Louis said honestly. "It's tiny," Rosie said with a laugh. "Wait until you see inside." They climbed out of the car and walked up the stone path to the red door. Rosie unlocked it and led them inside. The cottage was indeed small, but it was cozy and filled with love. The living room had comfortable furniture that had clearly seen years of use. Bookshelves lined every wall, stuffed with books and photos and artwork. A fireplace dominated one corner, its mantel covered with photographs. Louis was drawn immediately to the photos. There was baby Oliver, his eyes already that distinctive brown. Toddler Oliver covered in paint. Young Oliver holding up a drawing proudly. Teenage Oliver at his school graduation. Recent photos of Oliver looking thinner, more tired, taken after his diagnosis, Louis realized. But what made Louis's breath catch were the other photos scattered among Oliver's pictures. Photos of Louis himself. Newspaper clippings of his victories. Printed screenshots from interviews. A photo of 12-year-old Louis and Rosie together, their arms around each other, grinning at the camera. "I kept you in our lives the only way I could," Rosie said softly from behind him. "Oliver grew up seeing your face on our walls, hearing stories about you. You were always part of this family, even though you didn't know we existed." Louis picked up the photo of them as children. He remembered the day it was taken, the summer before he left. They'd been at the town fair and Rosie's mother had insisted on taking their picture. "Can I keep this?" he asked. "Of course," Rosie said. "Everything here is yours too now. You're part of this family." Oliver had disappeared into what Louis assumed was the kitchen. Now he emerged carrying 3 glasses of water. "Dinner won't be fancy," he warned. "Mum's a great cook, but we usually keep things simple." "I don't need fancy," Louis repeated. "I just need to be here with you." As Rosie moved to the kitchen to start preparing dinner, Louis looked around the small cottage and felt something he hadn't felt in years: peace. Real, deep peace. This tiny house with its worn furniture and cluttered bookshelves felt more like home than his Monaco penthouse ever had. "Want to see my room?" Oliver asked. "Fair warning, it's basically an art studio that happens to have a bed in it." Louis followed his son down a narrow hallway. Oliver's room was small but bright, with a large window overlooking the back garden. Every surface was covered with art supplies, paints, brushes, canvases, sketchbooks. Finished paintings leaned against the walls, and Louis could see immediately that his son was talented. "These are incredible," Louis said, examining a painting of the treehouse. "You have real skill." "Mum says I get it from her side of the family," Oliver said. "Her mum was an artist before she opened the bakery." "Can I see more?" Louis asked. Oliver hesitated, then pulled out a large portfolio from under his bed. These are personal. I've never shown them to anyone except Mum." He opened the portfolio and Louis felt his heart clench. The paintings were all of him. Louis racing, Louis on podiums, Louis in interviews. Some were copied from photos, but others were clearly from Oliver's imagination. Louis as Oliver pictured him, the father he'd never met but always dreamed about. "I painted these over the years," Oliver explained quietly. "Whenever I missed you, which was often, I'd paint you. It made me feel closer to you somehow." Louis couldn't speak. He just pulled his son into another embrace and held him tight. They stood there in Oliver's small room, surrounded by paintings of a father and son who had never met, and Louis felt the full weight of 25 years of missed moments crash over him. But instead of drowning in regret, he felt something else: determination. They couldn't change the past, but they could shape the future. "We're going to beat this," Louis said firmly, pulling back to look Oliver in the eyes. "This cancer doesn't know who it's dealing with. You've got my stubbornness and your mother's strength. That's an unbeatable combination." Oliver smiled, though his eyes were still wet with tears. "You really think so?" "I know so," Louis said. "Tomorrow morning, first thing, we're going to the hospital. We'll get me tested, and when I'm a match, we'll schedule the transplant immediately." "What about your racing schedule?" Oliver asked. "Don't you have commitments?" "Nothing is more important than this," Louis said without hesitation. "Nothing. My team will understand, and if they don't, that's their problem, not mine." From the kitchen, Rosie called out, "Dinner's ready." They made their way back to the small dining area where Rosie had set out a simple meal: pasta with homemade sauce, salad, and fresh bread. It wasn't fancy, but the smell was incredible. "This is my mum's recipe," Rosie explained as they sat down at the small table. "I've been making it since I was 15. It's Oliver's favorite." "It smells amazing," Louis said honestly. As they ate, Oliver told stories about growing up in Meadowbrook, about the time he tried to build his own go-kart at age 8 and crashed it into Mrs. Peterson's fence, about winning the school art competition 3 years in a row, about his first day at university studying fine arts in London. "I had to defer this year," Oliver said, his voice quieter, "because of the treatments." "You'll go back," Rosie said firmly. "You'll finish your degree and become the amazing artist you're meant to be." Louis watched them interact, the easy way they finished each other's sentences, the inside jokes, the deep love that flowed between them. This was what he'd missed. Not just the big moments, but these ordinary evenings around a dinner table. After dinner, they moved to the living room. Rosie made tea while Oliver pulled out photo albums, actual physical albums, not digital files. "Mum's old-fashioned," Oliver explained with a grin. "She insists on printing photos." "I like having something tangible," Rosie said, bringing in the tea. "Something I can hold in my hands." They spent the next 3 hours going through the albums. Louis saw everything: Oliver's first bath, his first steps, his first day of school, birthday parties with homemade cakes, Christmas mornings with presents wrapped in newspaper because they couldn't afford fancy paper, school plays where Oliver painted scenery because he was too shy to act, football matches where he sat on the bench drawing the game instead of playing in it. "I wasn't very good at sports," Oliver admitted. "Mum tried to encourage me, but I was more interested in capturing the movement in my sketchbook than actually moving myself." "Nothing wrong with that," Louis said. "The world needs artists as much as it needs athletes." As the evening wore on, Louis realized how tired Oliver looked. The young man was trying to hide it, but Louis could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the way he leaned more heavily against the couch cushions. "You should rest," Louis said gently. "I'm fine," Oliver protested, but even as he said it, he yawned. "Oliver, go to bed," Rosie said in a tone that was pure mother, loving but firm. "We'll still be here in the morning." Oliver looked at Louis with sudden panic. "You're staying, right? You're not leaving tonight. I'm not going anywhere, Lewis promised. I'll sleep on the couch if that's okay with your mum, but I'm not leaving. The relief on Oliver's face was heartbreaking. Okay, good. He stood up slowly and Lewis noticed how carefully he moved as if his body hurt. Good night, Dad. The word Dad hit Lewis like a physical blow. It was the first time Oliver had said it directly to him, not testing it out or asking permission, just stating a fact. Good night, son, Lewis replied, his voice thick with emotion. After Oliver disappeared down the hallway, Rosie and Lewis sat in silence for a moment. The cottage was quiet except for the ticking of a clock on the wall. He's getting worse, isn't he? Lewis asked quietly. Rosie nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. The doctors said 6 months without a transplant. We're 4 months into that timeline. He's tired all the time now. Some days he can barely get out of bed. Why didn't you contact me sooner? Lewis asked, not accusing, just trying to understand. Pride, Rosie admitted. Stupid, foolish pride. I kept thinking we could handle it ourselves, that we'd find a match in the registry. By the time I accepted that we needed you, I'd wasted months. She looked at him with anguished eyes. What if I waited too long? What if? Stop, Lewis interrupted, taking her hands. You reached out, I'm here, we're going to fix this. You can't promise that, Rosie whispered. You might not be a match, or the transplant might not work, or... Then we'll deal with that if it happens, Lewis said firmly. But right now, in this moment, I'm here and I'm not giving up, and neither are you. Rosie collapsed against him, crying into his shoulder. Lewis held her, stroking her hair, letting her release 25 years of fear and worry and loneliness. I'm so tired, she whispered. I've been strong for so long and I'm just so tired. Then let me be strong for a while, Lewis said. You've carried this alone for 25 years. You don't have to anymore. They sat like that for a long time, holding each other in the small living room. Eventually, Rosie pulled back and wiped her eyes. I should get you some blankets for the couch, she said. Rosie, wait, Lewis said. There's something I need to say. She looked at him and Lewis took a deep breath. Earlier, under the oak tree, you told me you loved me, that you'd loved me for 25 years. I know it's a lot to process, Rosie started. I don't expect. I love you too, Lewis interrupted. I think I've loved you since we were 7 years old and you stood up to those bullies for me. I think I've loved you through every race I won and every relationship that failed. I think I've been trying to find my way back to you for 25 years. Rosie's breath caught. Lewis. I'm not saying we rush into anything, Lewis continued. We have a lot to figure out, but I want you to know that when I said I'm not going anywhere, I meant it. Not just for Oliver, though I'd stay for him alone, but for you too, for us. What about your life in Monaco, your career? I can race from anywhere, Lewis said, and Monaco never felt like home anyway. This, he gestured around the small cottage, this feels like home. You and Oliver feel like home. Rosie started crying again, but she was smiling too. I can't believe this is real. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and you'll be gone. I'm real, Lewis said, kissing her forehead, and I'm not going anywhere. She fetched blankets and a pillow for the couch, though they both knew Lewis probably wouldn't sleep much. There was too much to think about, too many emotions swirling through him. Before Rosie went to her own room, she paused in the doorway. Lewis, thank you for coming home. Thank you for asking me to, Lewis replied. After she left, Lewis lay on the couch staring at the ceiling. The cottage was silent now, everyone asleep except him. He pulled out his phone and looked at the hundreds of messages that had piled up from his team, his sponsors, journalists wanting interviews about his championship win. None of it seemed important anymore. He opened his email and typed a message to his manager. Family emergency. Clearing my schedule indefinitely. Will explain soon. Lewis. Then he set his phone aside and closed his eyes. Tomorrow they would go to the hospital. Tomorrow they would start the process of saving Oliver's life. Tomorrow they would begin figuring out how to be a family. But tonight, Lewis was exactly where he needed to be, in a small cottage in Meadowbrook, with his son sleeping down the hall and the woman he loved in the next room. After 25 years of racing around the world, he'd finally found what he was looking for. He'd found his way home. Lewis woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of quiet voices. For a moment he was disoriented. This wasn't his Monaco apartment. Then memory flooded back and he smiled. He was home. He sat up and saw morning light streaming through the cottage windows. From the kitchen came the murmur of Rosie and Oliver talking. Louis checked his phone, 6:30 in the morning. His body was still on race day schedule, waking early out of habit. He stood up, folded the blankets neatly, and made his way to the kitchen. Rosie was at the stove making eggs while Oliver sat at the small table with a cup of tea, looking pale but determined. "Good morning," Louis said. They both turned, and the smiles that lit up their faces made Louis's heart soar. "Morning, Dad," Oliver said, and this time the word came out easily, naturally. "I made coffee," Rosie said. "I wasn't sure how you take it." "Black is fine," Louis said, accepting the mug she offered. "How are you feeling, Oliver?" "Nervous," Oliver admitted, "but ready. Let's go save my life." They arrived at Royal London Hospital by 9 o'clock. Louis had called ahead using his connections, and the head of oncology was waiting for them personally. Dr. Sarah Patel was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Mr. Hamilton, thank you for coming so quickly," she said, shaking his hand. "We've been hoping to find a match for Oliver for months." "I should have been here from the beginning," Louis said. "Let's get me tested immediately." Dr. Patel led them to a private consultation room and explained the process. "We'll take blood samples and tissue samples today. The results will take about a week. If you're a compatible match, we'll schedule the transplant as soon as possible." "A week?" Louis asked, alarmed. "Can't we rush it?" "I understand your urgency," Dr. Patel said gently, "but we need to be thorough. A bad match could be worse than no match at all." Louis looked at Oliver, who nodded. "A week is fine, Dad. I've waited this long." The testing took most of the morning. Louis sat patiently while nurses drew what felt like gallons of blood, took tissue samples, and asked him detailed questions about his medical history. Through it all, Rosie and Oliver waited in the consultation room. When Louis finally returned to them, Oliver was lying on the couch with his eyes closed, his face pale. Rosie sat beside him, stroking his hair with a worried expression. "How is he?" Louis asked quietly. "Tired," Rosie said. "The trip here wore him out more than usual." Louis knelt beside the couch. "Oliver, should we take you home?" Oliver opened his eyes and smiled weakly. "I'm okay, just need to rest a bit." He reached out and took Louis's hand. "Did they get everything they need?" "Yes," Louis said. "Now we wait for the results." Dr. Patel returned with paperwork. "Mr. Hamilton, I need you to understand what you're committing to if you're a match. Bone marrow donation is a serious procedure. You'll be under anesthesia for several hours while we extract marrow from your pelvic bone. Recovery takes several weeks. There will be pain and discomfort." "I don't care," Louis said immediately. "Whatever it takes." "I also need to discuss expectations," Dr. Patel continued, her voice gentle. "Even with a perfect match and successful transplant, Oliver's prognosis is uncertain. The leukemia is aggressive. We're hoping for remission, but I can't make promises." "I understand," Louis said, though the words felt like stones in his chest. "No, I don't think you do," Dr. Patel said, not unkindly. "Mr. Hamilton, you've just discovered you have a son. You're bonding with him, building a relationship. I need you to prepare yourself for the possibility that even if everything goes perfectly, you might still lose him. That's the reality we're facing." Louis looked at Oliver, who was watching him with those familiar brown eyes. His son. The son he'd had for 25 years without knowing it. The son he might lose before truly knowing him. "Then we'll make every moment count," Louis said firmly. "However long we have, we'll make it matter." Dr. Patel nodded approvingly. "That's the right attitude. Now, let's get Oliver home to rest. I'll call you as soon as the results are ready." The drive back to Meadowbrook was quiet. Oliver slept in the back seat while Rosie stared out the window, lost in thought. Louis focused on driving, his mind racing with everything Dr. Patel had said. When they arrived at the cottage, Louis helped Oliver inside into his bedroom. His son, he still couldn't quite believe he could use that word, looked so fragile lying in bed, so different from the young man who joked with him the night before. "Dad," Oliver said as Louis was about to leave. "Yeah." "Stay for a minute." Louis sat on the edge of the bed. "What's on your mind?" "I'm scared," Oliver admitted quietly. "Not of dying exactly, but of dying without really knowing you. We just found each other and now there's this ticking clock." Then tell me things, Lewis said. Tell me everything. What's your favorite color? What do you dream about? What makes you laugh? Oliver smiled. Blue, like the sky in your eyes when you're concentrating. I've seen it in photos. I dream about painting something so beautiful it makes people cry. And Mum makes me laugh, the way she hums off-key when she cooks. What else? Lewis prompted. I'm afraid of spiders, but I won't kill them. I catch them and put them outside. I can't whistle no matter how hard I try. I hate mushrooms, but I love every other vegetable. I read the ending of books first because suspense makes me anxious. Oliver was speaking faster now, as if trying to download 25 years of life in one conversation. Keep going, Lewis said, memorizing every detail. I wanted to be an astronaut when I was 6. I had my first kiss when I was 16 with a girl named Emma who tasted like strawberry lip gloss. I cry at sad movies but try to hide it. I talk to myself when I paint. I'm rubbish at football, but I'm brilliant at chess. I want to see Paris someday. I want to fall in love. I want to live, Dad. I really, really want to live. Lewis was crying now, unable to stop the tears. You will live. I promise you, Oliver. We're going to beat this. You can't promise that, Oliver said, echoing his mother's words from the night before. Watch me, Lewis said fiercely. I've spent my entire career doing impossible things. Winning races I shouldn't have won, breaking records people said couldn't be broken. This is just another impossible thing, and I'm going to do it. We're going to do it together. Oliver smiled, his eyes drifting closed with exhaustion. I'm glad you're here. Me too, Lewis whispered. Me too. He sat with Oliver until his son fell asleep, then quietly left the room. In the living room, Rosie was sitting on the couch staring at a photo album, though Lewis suspected she wasn't really seeing the pictures. He's asleep, Lewis said, sitting beside her. Thank you for staying with him, Rosie said. He needs you. I need him too, Lewis replied, and I need you. Rosie leaned against him and they sat in comfortable silence. Outside, the afternoon sun painted the cottage in golden light. Birds sang in the garden. The world kept turning, beautiful and terrible and precious. What do we do for the next week? Rosie asked. Just wait. We live, Lewis said. We make memories, we be a family. And that's exactly what they did. Over the next 7 days, Lewis moved into the cottage's tiny spare room. He called his team and explained everything. Well, the parts he was ready to share. He told them he'd discovered he had a son who was ill and he was taking time off. The team was supportive, though Lewis knew there would be questions eventually. He spent his days with Oliver and Rosie, learning everything he'd missed. They visited the treehouse every afternoon when Oliver felt strong enough. Lewis learned that his son was left-handed like him, that he hummed while painting just like Rosie hummed while cooking, that he had Lewis's stubborn streak and Rosie's kind heart. They played chess. Oliver won every game. They watched movies, cooked together, talked for hours. Lewis told stories about racing and Oliver told stories about growing up. Rosie filled in the gaps, painting a picture of 25 years of life. On the 6th day, Oliver had a bad episode. He collapsed in the bathroom, and by the time they got him to bed, he was running a fever. Rosie called Dr. Patel, who said it was expected. His immune system was failing. Lewis sat beside Oliver's bed all night, watching his son sleep fitfully. At 3 in the morning, Oliver woke up. Dad, you're still here. Always, Lewis said. I'm always here now. Good, Oliver whispered, then fell back asleep. On the 7th day, Dr. Patel called. Lewis answered on the first ring, his heart pounding. Rosie and Oliver crowded close, trying to hear. Mr. Hamilton, Dr. Patel said, and Lewis couldn't read her tone. The results are back. And, Lewis asked, barely breathing. You're a complete match. 10 out of 10 markers. It's actually quite rare to find such a perfect match. Even between parents and children, we usually only see 8 or 9 markers align. This is extraordinary. Lewis felt his knees go weak with relief. Rosie started crying. Oliver grabbed both their hands, squeezing tight. When can we do the transplant? Lewis asked. How soon can you be ready? Dr. Patel replied. Given Oliver's deteriorating condition, I'd like to schedule it for the day after tomorrow if possible. We'll be there, Lewis said immediately. Whatever you need. After he hung up, the 3 of them just held each other, crying and laughing at the same time. You're a match, Oliver kept saying, as if he couldn't quite believe it. You're actually a match." "Of course I am," Lewis said, trying to joke through his tears. "I'm your father. We're connected in every way possible." The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation. Lewis had pre-surgery consultations, signed consent forms, underwent more tests. Oliver did the same. They explained the risks: for Lewis, infection and pain; for Oliver, rejection of the transplant or failure to achieve remission. The night before the surgery, Lewis couldn't sleep. He wandered into the living room and found Rosie there, also unable to rest. "Scared?" she asked. "Terrified," Lewis admitted. "What if it doesn't work? What if I'm not enough to save him?" "You're already enough," Rosie said firmly. "Lewis, whether this works or not, you've given Oliver something precious, a father who loves him. That matters more than you know." "But I want more time," Lewis said desperately. "We just found each other. It's not fair." "No, it's not," Rosie agreed. "But we have right now. We have this moment. That has to be enough." Lewis pulled her close and they held each other as the night slowly turned to dawn. The morning of the surgery arrived too quickly and not fast enough. They arrived at the hospital before sunrise. Oliver was admitted first, taken to a private room to begin preparation for the transplant. Lewis would go into surgery an hour later. In the pre-op room, a nurse prepared Lewis's IV while explaining the procedure one more time. Lewis barely heard her. His mind was on Oliver just down the hall, being prepared to receive the gift that might save his life. "Mr. Hamilton," the nurse's voice broke through his thoughts. "Do you have any questions?" "Just one," Lewis said. "When can I see Oliver after?" "You'll be in recovery for several hours," the nurse explained. "You'll be groggy from the anesthesia and we'll need to monitor you. But once you're stable, we can wheel you to his room if you'd like." "I'd like that very much," Lewis said. Rosie appeared in the doorway, her eyes red from crying. "They're taking Oliver in now. He wanted to see you first." The nurse nodded. "We have a few minutes before Mr. Hamilton needs to go in." They wheeled Lewis's bed down the hall to Oliver's room. His son was already dressed in a hospital gown, an IV in his arm, looking small and vulnerable in the hospital bed. "Hey, Dad," Oliver said, trying to smile. "Ready for this?" "More than ready," Lewis said, reaching out to take Oliver's hand. "We're in this together." "I'm scared," Oliver admitted. "What if my body rejects the transplant?" "Then we'll try again," Lewis said firmly. "And again, as many times as it takes. I'm not giving up on you." Oliver's eyes filled with tears. "I love you, Dad. I know it's fast and we've only known each other for a week, but I do. I love you." Lewis felt his heart crack open. "I love you too, son, so much." "Promise me something," Oliver said urgently, gripping Lewis's hand tighter. "If something happens to me." "Nothing's going to happen," Lewis interrupted. "But if it does," Oliver persisted, "promise me you'll take care of Mum. She's been alone for so long, carrying everything by herself. She deserves to be happy. Promise me you'll make sure she's happy." "I promise," Lewis said, his voice breaking. "But you're going to be here to make sure I keep that promise. You're going to be fine." A nurse appeared. "I'm sorry, but we need to take Oliver to the OR now." "Wait," Oliver said. He looked at his mother, who'd been standing silently in the corner. "Mum, come here." Rosie approached the bed and Oliver took both his parents' hands, placing them together. "Whatever happens today, I want you both to know I had a good life. Mum, you gave me everything. You sacrificed everything. And Dad, even though we just met, you've shown me what it means to be brave and kind. I'm the luckiest person in the world to have you both." They were all crying now, Lewis, Rosie, Oliver, even the nurses trying to maintain professional composure. "We love you so much," Rosie whispered, kissing Oliver's forehead. "See you on the other side," Oliver said with a weak smile as they began to wheel him away. Lewis watched his son disappear down the corridor, and for a moment he couldn't breathe. What if that was the last time he saw Oliver conscious? What if something went wrong? "He's going to be okay," Rosie said, though her voice shook with doubt. "He has to be." 20 minutes later, they came for Lewis. The surgical team explained the procedure one last time. They would extract bone marrow from his pelvic bone using large needles. He'd be completely unconscious. The whole process would take about 2 hours. As the anesthesiologist prepared to put him under, Lewis looked at Rosie standing beside his bed. "I love you," he said. "I should have said it more. I should have." "SHH," Rosie said, taking his hand. "I know I love you too, now go save our son." The anesthesia pulled Louis under and everything went dark. He woke to pain, deep, throbbing pain in his lower back and hips. For a moment he didn't know where he was, then memory returned in a rush. "Oliver," he croaked. "Where's Oliver?" A nurse appeared beside his bed. "Mr. Hamilton, you're in recovery. The extraction went perfectly. We got excellent bone marrow samples." "My son," Louis said more urgently. "Where is my son?" "The transplant is underway now," the nurse explained. "He's receiving your bone marrow as we speak. It's going well so far." Louis tried to sit up, but pain shot through his body. He gasped. "Easy," the nurse said firmly. "You've just had a major procedure. You need to rest." "I need to see him," Louis insisted. "Soon," the nurse promised. "Let's get you stable first." The next few hours were a blur of pain medication and monitoring. Finally, Dr. Patel appeared. "The transplant is complete," she said. "Oliver received your bone marrow successfully. Now comes the hardest part, waiting to see if his body accepts it." "How long?" Louis asked. "We'll know within a few weeks if engraftment is happening," Dr. Patel explained. "That's when your stem cells begin growing in his bone marrow and producing new blood cells. But full recovery takes months. He'll need to stay in isolation to avoid infection." "Can I see him now?" Louis asked. Dr. Patel hesitated. "You're still in significant pain, Mr. Hamilton." "I don't care," Louis said. "Please, I need to see my son." They wheeled Louis to Oliver's room in the transplant unit. Oliver lay in a bed surrounded by monitors and IV lines, his face pale but peaceful in drug-induced sleep. Rosie sat in a chair beside the bed, holding Oliver's hand. When she saw Louis being wheeled in, she stood up. "How are you?" she asked, seeing him wince with pain. "Doesn't matter," Louis said. "How is he?" "Sleeping," Rosie said. "The transplant went well. They said the next 48 hours are critical." Louis's bed was positioned on the other side of Oliver's, and the three of them formed a triangle, mother, father, and son, connected by biology and love and desperate hope. "Now we wait," Rosie said quietly. And wait they did. The first 48 hours were agonizing. Oliver developed a fever on the second day, sending everyone into panic. But Dr. Patel assured them it was normal. Oliver's body was adjusting to the new bone marrow. Louis remained in the hospital despite his own pain, refusing to leave Oliver's side. The nurses brought him pain medication and helped him move from bed to wheelchair so he could stay close to his son. On the third day, Oliver woke up. "Dad," he said groggily, looking around the room. "You're here." "Of course I'm here," Louis said from his wheelchair beside the bed. "Where else would I be?" "How do you feel?" Rosie asked anxiously. "Weird," Oliver said. "Tired, kind of like I've been hit by a truck, but alive. I feel alive." Over the next 2 weeks, they watched and waited. Louis recovered from his procedure, though he moved stiffly and couldn't stand for long periods. But every moment of pain was worth it when he saw Oliver sitting up in bed, color returning to his cheeks, eating actual food instead of just IV nutrition. Dr. Patel ran tests every few days, checking Oliver's blood counts. On day 14, she came in with a smile that told them everything before she even spoke. "It's working," she announced. "Engraftment is happening. Your new bone marrow is producing healthy blood cells, Oliver. Your white blood cell count is rising. We're seeing no signs of rejection." The relief was so intense that Louis actually felt dizzy. Rosie burst into tears. Oliver just grinned, that beautiful smile that was half Louis and half Rosie. "So I'm going to live?" Oliver asked. "You still have a long road ahead," Dr. Patel cautioned. "Months of recovery, continued treatment, careful monitoring. But yes, Oliver, you're going to live." 6 weeks after the transplant, Oliver was discharged from the hospital. He was still weak, still tired easily, still needed constant monitoring. But he was alive and improving every day. Louis moved them all to a rented house on the outskirts of London, close to the hospital for Oliver's frequent checkups. The house was bigger than Rosie's cottage, with a proper art studio for Oliver and a garden where they could sit in the sunshine. Louis's racing team had been remarkably understanding, giving him all the time he needed. But eventually, he knew he'd have to make decisions about his career. 3 months after the transplant, Oliver was strong enough for short walks. On one of these walks through the garden, Oliver brought up what Lewis had been avoiding. "You need to go back to racing," Oliver said. "I'm exactly where I need to be," Lewis replied. "Dad, you love racing," Oliver insisted. "I've seen the videos, read the interviews. Racing is part of who you are. You can't give that up for me." "I'm not giving it up," Lewis said. "I'm just postponing it." "For how long?" Oliver challenged. "Until I'm completely recovered. That could take a year or more. You're a champion, Dad. Champions don't sit on the sidelines." That evening, Lewis and Rosie had their first real conversation about the future. "Oliver's right," Rosie said as they sat in the garden after Oliver had gone to bed. "You need to race again." "How can I leave?" Lewis asked. "What if something happens while I'm gone?" "Then we'll call you and you'll come home," Rosie said simply. "Lewis, you can't put your entire life on hold. That's not fair to you, and it's not what Oliver wants." "What do you want?" Lewis asked. Rosie was quiet for a long moment. "I want you to be happy. Racing makes you happy." "You make me happy," Lewis said. "You and Oliver. This," he gestured at the house, the garden, the life they'd built over the past 3 months. "This makes me happy." "It doesn't have to be one or the other," Rosie pointed out. "You can race and come home to us. That's what families do. They support each other's dreams." Lewis knew she was right, but the thought of leaving still terrified him. The sound of engines roaring filled the air at Silverstone Circuit. Lewis stood in the garage, pulling on his helmet, preparing for what would be his comeback race after a year away from Formula One. His team had held his spot, understanding that family came first. In the stands, wearing matching team jackets, sat Rosie and Oliver, his family. Lewis caught sight of them on the monitor and felt his heart swell. Oliver looked healthy now. His hair had grown back thick and curly, his cheeks had color, and he'd gained back all the weight he'd lost during treatment. He was 25 years old and in full remission. The doctors called it a miracle. Lewis called it determination. "Ready, Hamilton?" his team principal asked. "More than ready," Lewis replied. He climbed into the car, and as the engine roared to life beneath him, Lewis felt something he hadn't felt in over a year complete. He had his family waiting for him, and he had his purpose in this car. He didn't have to choose between them anymore. The race was incredible. Lewis drove like he was 20 years younger, aggressive but smart, his instincts sharp despite the time away. He crossed the finish line in second place, and the crowd went wild. After the podium ceremony, Lewis found Rosie and Oliver waiting in the paddock. Oliver had his sketchbook out. He'd been drawing the race, capturing the speed and excitement in charcoal lines. "That was amazing, Dad," Oliver said, throwing his arms around Lewis despite the champagne covering his racing suit. "You were brilliant," Rosie added, kissing him. "Welcome back." "It feels good to be back," Lewis admitted. "But the best part is knowing I get to come home to you too." They walked toward the car park together, Lewis's arm around Rosie, Oliver walking beside them still sketching. Other drivers and team members stared. The story of Lewis Hamilton discovering his son had made headlines months ago, though Lewis and Rosie had kept most details private. "I have news," Oliver said as they reached the car. "The gallery in London wants to do a show of my paintings. They said my racing series is unlike anything they've seen." "Oliver, that's wonderful," Rosie exclaimed. "When?" Lewis asked. 3 months, Oliver said. "I wanted to wait until I was sure you'd both be there." "We'll be there," Lewis promised. "Both of us, I'll make sure of it." The drive back to their London house was filled with chatter about the race, Oliver's upcoming show, and Rosie's plans for the garden. It was ordinary and perfect, the kind of family moment Lewis had dreamed about during those long, lonely years of racing without knowing his family existed. That evening, after Oliver had gone to bed, Lewis found Rosie in the garden. The summer air was warm, and stars were beginning to appear overhead. "I've been thinking," Lewis said, sitting beside her on the bench. "Dangerous activity," Rosie teased. "I'm serious," Lewis said, taking her hand. "We've been together for a year now, living together, raising Oliver together, being a family. But there's one thing we haven't done." "What's that?" Rosie asked. Lewis pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it. Inside was a ring, simple and elegant, with a small diamond that caught the starlight. "We made a promise 28 years ago in a treehouse," Lewis said. "We promised we'd get married someday. I know we were just children then, and I know we've taken the long way around. But Rosie, I want to keep that promise now. Rosie's hands flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Will you marry me? Louis asked. Will you let me spend the rest of my life making up for the 25 years I missed? Yes, Rosie whispered. Yes, absolutely yes. Louis slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into a kiss. When they broke apart, they heard clapping from Oliver's window above. Finally, Oliver shouted down to them. I've been waiting for this since the day you came back. They both laughed and Louis called up to him, Go to bed. Not until you set a date, Oliver called back. Soon, Louis promised, very soon. 3 months later, they held the wedding in Meadowbrook, in the clearing beneath the oak tree where everything had begun. It was small, just close friends and family. Oliver walked his mother down the aisle, beaming with pride and health. Louis stood waiting under the branches where he'd carved their initials 28 years earlier. When Rosie appeared in her simple white dress, her red hair adorned with wildflowers, Louis felt 12 years old again, nervous and excited and absolutely certain. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves. Rosie promised to love him through every race and every homecoming. Louis promised to always find his way back to her, no matter how far the world took him. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Oliver cheered louder than anyone. Finally, he shouted, my parents are married. At the reception in Rosie's cottage garden, Oliver gave a toast that had everyone in tears. My mum once told me that some love stories take a long time to unfold, he began. 28 years from first kiss to wedding day might seem like forever, but I'm standing here, healthy and alive, as living proof that some things are worth waiting for. He looked at his parents, his eyes bright with emotion. Thank you for fighting for each other, for me, for us. Thank you for showing me that it's never too late for a happy ending. Or maybe this isn't an ending at all. Maybe it's just the beginning. Louis pulled Rosie close as their son spoke, and he thought about everything that had led to this moment. The childhood friendship, the innocent summer that created Oliver, the 25 years of separation, the letter that brought him home, the illness that could have ended everything but instead brought them together. Every moment, the good and the painful, had been necessary to bring them here. Later that night, after the guests had left and Oliver had gone to bed, Louis and Rosie returned to the treehouse. They climbed up carefully, adults now, not children, and sat where they'd made their original promise. Do you remember what you said that last day? Louis asked. When you gave me the compass. I said it would help you find your way back to me, Rosie recalled. You were right, Louis said, pulling out the compass he still wore every day. It took 25 years, but I found my way home. We both did, Rosie said, showing her matching bracelet. We found our way back to each other. They sat in the treehouse as the moon rose, holding hands just like they had at 12 years old. But this time they weren't saying goodbye. This time they were promising hello to all the tomorrows they'd spend together, making up for lost time and building new memories. I love you, Louis whispered. I've loved you since we were 7 years old, and I'll love you until my last breath. I love you too, Rosie replied. Always have, always will. Below them in the cottage, Oliver was already asleep, his sketchbook open beside him. On the page was a drawing of the treehouse with 2 figures inside, his parents, finally together, finally home. At the bottom of the page, in his neat handwriting, Oliver had written, "The day we became a family, better late than never." And it was better. Despite the lost years, despite the pain and fear and uncertainty, it was all worth it for family, for love, for coming home. Louis had spent 25 years racing around the world, chasing victories and breaking records. But his greatest achievement wasn't any championship. It was this, finding his way back to the red-haired girl who'd loved him first, discovering the son he never knew he had, and building a family from the pieces of a childhood promise. Some journeys take longer than others. Some promises take 28 years to keep, but the best ones, the ones worth making, are worth every mile traveled and every year waited. Lewis Hamilton had finally found what he'd been searching for all along, and it had been waiting for him in Meadowbrook, in a treehouse, in the heart of the woman who never stopped loving him. He was home. We hope this story touched your heart and reminded you that it's never too late for love and second chances. Now we'd love to know, where are you listening from? Drop your city and country in the comments below. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. By subscribing, you're helping us spread kindness and hope to people all around the world who need to hear these inspiring stories. And don't go just yet. Click on the video appearing on your screen right now for another amazing story that will warm your heart. Thank you for being part of our community. See you in the next video.